Everyone, and welcome back to the Oregon's Pac-12 basketball roundup. I'm Tyson Alger, joined here by Danny Moran for what could potentially be our last time doing this format of video. We're in talks of branching this out to a podcast format, which will start next week. Still a name to be determined.
People are tired of seeing our faces,
Yeah,
so we're going to go audio.
These faces are not built for the internet. So with that being said, it's been about 2 weeks since we've done one of these. In that time frame, Pac-12 play is pretty much off and running. Oregon is 8-0 in Pac-12? 7-0 in Pac-12. The Beavers are not.
They're the opposite of that.
We had a Civil War game that Oregon won by 42 points. 42 points. So let's start there in the sense of that game in itself kind of represented the separation of those two programs. But also you have one program in Oregon that is playing as good as any team in the country right now, and then you have a team in Oregon State that is kind of quite the opposite.
Right.
Heading into this week is games against at Utah, at Colorado. The Oregon State game for a team that is 0-7 in Pac-12 play is actually semi-intriguing because it's playing against another winless Pac-12 opponent in Colorado, which, as we talked about earlier, is, in our opinion, is probably the most disappointing team in the Pac-12 right now because we thought that they had a chance of being relatively decent.
Yeah, I think the expectations were not just that they would make the tournament, but probably would be in that second tier behind the UCLA's, Arizona's, and Oregon.
I think we all thought it was Oregon, UCLA, Arizona, in whatever order, and then I think like Cal and Colorado were kind of in that.
Yeah, there was kind of that range afterward,
right.
And honestly, for the most part, there's not one team there that's been, exceeded expectations. Let's say.
Right.
It's really just been those three: Arizona, UCLA, and Oregon.
Well, I mean, even USC has really fallen. I mean, I think we kind of thought that was going to happen because they had a pretty soft non-conference schedule.
Right.
They got up to number 23 in the country, and now they've lost to Cal. They've lost to.
They almost lost to Arizona State.
Yeah.
That was a close game.
Yeah,
but
so USC that was kind of a little out of smoke and mirrors. But
they're a little middle of the road. I mean, they had a great start, like you said, ran the table, but benefited from the fact that they were undefeated.
But a team like USC still has a chance of making the NCAA tournament, whereas Colorado, that ship has sailed.
At this point, short of a Pac-12 tournament run, they've lost 4 games by 3 points or less. They had 2 overtime games against the Washington schools last week where they lost by 2 points each. And those are bad losses because Washington they're not going to the tournament either. So that was a chance for Colorado to make up some ground. So they'll be primed and ready to go. Them and Oregon State, as you mentioned, the 2 winless teams in Pac-12 play at this point. Colorado's obviously been in more games than Oregon State. Oregon State has lost their last 6 games, all been by double digits, most notably, as you mentioned, the Oregon game. I mean, not to plug our own stuff because that's what I'm about to do. I mean, we wrote a story going into the Civil War about how Oregon State, their 2 seasons had been defined by injuries.
Right.
Oregon's to Dylan Brooks, who's obviously been back, and we'll talk more about him and his status for the Utah game. But
that's called a tease.
That's a tease. And then Trace Tinkle, who is not back. Not sure with Oregon State when they're going to get him back, if they're going to get him back. He's now missed 14 games. He's only played 6. He would be on target, for a potential medical redshirt, but he's still going to get more scans, so we'll see if he ultimately ends up being cleared. But he will not be available for this week's slate of games between against Colorado and against Utah. So until that happens, we're not sure really if Oregon State how many more strides they can make at this point.
I know this is something that you're writing about, and so don't give away the whole thing. But what would the incentive be of bringing Trace Tinkle back at this point?
The incentive, I think, would be for a team that's so young, relying on pretty much a backcourt that's relying entirely on freshmen and sophomores. Same with the front court. I mean, everyone is pretty much a freshman or a sophomore that's playing significant minutes at this point.
That works for Kentucky.
It does work for Kentucky. It's not working for Oregon State right now. To give them their best player. I mean, he's their arguably their most efficient rebounder. He's definitely their best scorer. You add that, and he's a versatile player. He can play the 3 or the 4, and just kind of see now that these other guys, these other pieces have gotten the amount of minutes they have. See, okay, once all the pieces are together, what exactly do they have?
Right.
Because guys on the team have said, Stevie Thompson, I remember, said a couple times, we really need him back because we want to see what we have, and he's going to open up a lot of stuff for us. So I think that would be the reason. I know a lot of fans are, obviously in the camp of he should redshirt. This year is lost. We'll see what ultimately happens with this scam, but until that comes, hard to see things getting a ton better for Oregon State unless other guys make a massive leap.
Right.
Now for the Ducks.
Speaking on the injury front, so
Yeah.
for Dylan Brooks, he got injured. He came back. He got injured again. Against Cal, he kind of collided with, I forget who he collided with, but he left the game with a sprained left foot, which was a big scare for the Ducks because that was the same foot that was surgically repaired over the offseason. So
Panic on Twitter.
Yeah, I think in about like the 12
yeah.
hours between when the injury happened and when the news got released that it was just a sprain, a lot of people were kind of assuming the worst because Oregon is still a top 3 Pac-12 team without Dylan Brooks. They're still potentially, I think they still would have had the potential to get to the Sweet 16 without Dylan Brooks. But once you get there, that's when it kind of separates of you need to have, frankly, a top level player in the college game. And Oregon has a lot of very, very good players. But Brooks is kind of the guy that can consistently kind of kick into that, upper notch. And he's the most experienced guy on the team, too. So it was good news for the Ducks that it was just a sprain. He missed the game against Stanford, but you don't really need most of your good players against Stanford if you're playing at Oregon's level. And he is questionable for Thursday against Utah, which Brooks was out practicing today without the boot on his foot, which was a good sign. I wouldn't be surprised if he plays on Thursday because that's a sneaky big game for Oregon. I know Utah is a little bit down this year for their standards. I think they're 14-5. Yeah. They got, I think, 1 or 2 votes in this week's AP Top 25, but it's just not quite that, sneakily dominant Utah team that we've seen over the last couple of years where they've had like a really good player or two to kind of build their team around. They have a lot of really good players, but no kind of like big time standout like in the past. But the reason why this is a big game for Oregon is Utah's still, they have a winning record. They're relatively high up in the RPI. I think they're number 23 right now. And if you look at the rest of Oregon's schedule, outside of Utah and Arizona and UCLA, there's nothing left quality-wise on that schedule. So, let's say it's a toss-up. Like, let's say they win one against Arizona and lose to UCLA. Having an extra loss to Utah on the road really isn't going to be good for them when it comes down. I mean, Oregon's not going to be worried about making the tournament.
Right.
They're more worried about where they were last year, where it's like, hey, we might have a chance at a number 1 seed here, and if they have a loss on the road to Utah, that's not going to help.
Do you think, because I remember last year when Oregon won the regular season Pac-12 title, I believe they were in LA for that last week when they clinched it, and that was a big deal for the team, Dana Altman, all those guys.
Right.
Now you look, both those teams are 2 games, them and Arizona, I should say, are 2 games ahead of UCLA in the loss column. Right. Is that something that you think means anything to these guys, given that they've done it before and they have goals of making potentially a Final Four?
Right. I think it's interesting because the last 2 years, Oregon has always they've been flying during the Pac-12, and then midway through the Pac-12, they've always had like a slip up. Last year, it came in the Bay Area where I think they had won, I forget how many games in a row, and then they went to the Bay Area, which Cal was decent last year. Stanford was okay.
Stanford was a bad loss.
And Oregon got swept out of there. And then they kind of took that and they built from there and then had a really good season afterwards. So the thing I've been wondering about this team is can they play at their highest level of basketball at the end of the year without having to have something in the middle of the season that kind of kicks them in the pants?
That swoon.
And I think the way the schedule sets up, it actually might help Oregon in that sense because honestly, the Pac-12 could be decided here in the next 2 weeks when you have Oregon playing Arizona and you have Oregon playing UCLA. If the Ducks have a bad 2 weeks, Oregon could be out of this thing in terms of who's going to win the regular season title by the end of this 2-week stretch here.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, basically right now, like we said, it's those 3 teams. Mm-hmm. Then there's a lot of other teams kind of in that middle where you don't really know what they're going to have. Maybe Utah's a level above at this point.
Yeah.
Given that they've added, two guys in the mid-season.
Yeah. I think you definitely have, the 3. Then I think Utah is the only, tier 2 team. Right. Then you might have, a USC, Cal.
Yeah.
Cal's a weird team because they, they're not good, but they have some really good players.
Yeah, they're good defensively.
Right.
It's strange that they struggle offensively as much as they do, given that they've got some talent there. Oregon defensively shut down Ivan Rabb.
Yeah.
They were the first team to do that. I mean, that's been what's so impressive about them. Yeah.
Speaking of, one team that you said has no chance of the Pac-12 of making the tournament, if there's one really bad team that I don't think I would want to play in the Pac-12 tournament, it would be Washington. Just because Fultz is that good. Now don't get me wrong, I don't foresee Washington winning the Pac-12 tournament or maybe even winning a game in there. But if that guy just gets lights out hot, he could probably win a game for them. You know what I mean? Like he's awfully good.
Yeah, they'd have to commit defensively for that game, which is But I think it's fair.
You know what I mean? Though, like they're the only really bad team in the conference that has an absolute bona fide stud on their team.
Yeah, I mean the numbers even that he puts up in losses are insane. And the question is, okay, if his numbers are that good, how are they that bad?
Right.
But I don't think
that might be a question for Romar and not us.
Yeah. I'm curious to see too. We probably wrap up with this, but Arizona State down the road, just because they are. Don't want to talk about bad defensively.
Yeah.
They're another bad defensive team, but they do have a style that they play and can go to. They're just going to go up tempo, go fast, and shoot a lot of threes, kind of like the Mike D'Antoni style system. And if you're having an off night, particularly offensively, they can beat you in that way. I don't have the talent of anyone like Markelle Fultz, but if you're talking about one of those teams that can maybe surprise down the road. But Pac-12, I'd say pretty top heavy this year. Last year it was pretty strong throughout maybe the first top half.
Right.
And this year that kind of
has
gone back up to the top.
So someone was just asking me about that on a radio interview I just did, where it's just like I think like last year everyone was so high on the Pac-12 because they got 8 teams into the tournament, and then everyone just bombed out in the first round except for pretty much Oregon, right?
Yeah, Oregon. Yeah, well, it was the big one that carried it through. Yeah.
This year, I legitimately think Oregon, Arizona, and UCLA all have Sweet 16 potential. It's just I don't know who else is going to make the tournament after those teams.
Right, and Arizona and Oregon are pretty good at this point.
Last thing we put out our Pac-12 power rankings this morning.
Mm-hmm.
You had Arizona 1.
Put Arizona 1. They actually got Alonzo Trier back from his PED suspension.
And going in and winning at UCLA. That's
convenient
big.
Bit of timing.
Yeah,
there with Alonzo Trier coming back. And UCLA they're solidly 3. They obviously lost to Oregon and their defense has regressed. So even as fun and exciting as they are with Lonzo Ball and all those guys, TJ Leaf, they're going to have to pick it up defensively to make the Final Four run that people were maybe anticipating before this week.
It was kind of funny earlier today. We were at Ducks practice and Casey Benson was just draining 3-pointers. I think he hit about 12 in a row, and someone said something along the lines of, "Yeah, well, he's not going to be able to do that when you're playing like." With a defender in your face, and I was like, well, maybe not if it's UCLA, because UCLA doesn't play defense.
Not that well.
So.
You crack people up with that?
No, actually.
No, Casey Benson did smile?
I was just talking to myself. No. All right, so, as you can tell, this is why we're going to do a podcast.
Yeah, we're moving on.
Video. But, so next week, if you follow us on Twitter, I'm at Tyson Alger. He's at Danny J. Moran, Danny J. Moran. We'll let you guys know where you can find our stuff. I mean, it's going to be on Oregon Live /Ducks/Beavers somewhere. And it will be basically probably the same thing, maybe a little bit longer since, there's less bandwidth with audio than video, and just maybe something you can take in the car along with you. And,
sure.
And hopefully we can get some guests too, and just kind of explore more of the Pac-12 side of things. And then,
it would transition to it, down the home stretch of Pac-12 play heading into the NCAA tournament. I think would be a good way to go about it. Submit names too. We don't have a name. We're not the creative type.
Yeah. So so this week, Thursday, Saturday games.
Yep.
You can find it all on OregonLive.com, and we will be back. Our voices will be back next week.